Battery die again? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Da, la, 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 la. Okay, it looks right now. I love that you're all in contact with other people in the class that aren't here. That makes me laugh and cry at the same time. Oh, yeah, he says yay! All right, I'm putting a Slido in so people can comment. I'm sorry you missed my thrilling people who are on the live stream. I'm sorry you missed my thrilling discussion of whether you can bribe people or not. A question asked in class. The answer is no, but you can relationship build. All right, should I review this really quickly? Friends or colleagues, you can use them to get access to closed research site. Gatekeepers, but they suck because they're meant to keep you out. They keep the gate. They're like the troll on the bridge. Their job is to not let you in or not let you cross, right? So they can be challenging. Okay, that was, the gist of what we said so far. Also that Joe is amazing. That's the next thing we're talking about. Yeah, Joan's really stressing that she thinks I'm a mean marker and Joe's really nice, which is good. Which is good. I'm. You know what? Less work for me. I'm down with it. Microphone's still on. All right. So someone in an organization can sponsor you, right? So if you know someone within an organ. Okay. So this is what happened to my boss, Sandra. In a sense, right? She had contacts at Alberta Justice. And, in order to get into a lot of the correctional facilities in Alberta, she negotiated with this person that was her contact, who basically vouched for her and allowed her to set up this big negotiation with, Alberta Justice to get into it. So it's someone who sponsors you, who sort of vouches for you. They make, they basically say this person's okay, you should let them in. And this kind of, sponsor, which can be a friend or a contact, a contact or a colleague, right? They're very important. Knowing someone is definitely good. And so one of the skills of a really good researcher is absolutely to get really, really good at building social connections, at building connections with people. I will say, like, my boss is amazing at it. She knows everybody in the correction system. She's friends with all of them. They all absolutely love her. She brings them donuts every time she's at, every trip to the prison ends with her bringing, or begins with her bringing donuts. So she has a huge Tim Hortons bill on her corporate credit card, which I get to reconcile. So I know exactly how much is on it. All of that stuff, right? Super important. Sponsors will get you into closed settings in real ways. And then offering something in return. What's that? So, it's usually something that's not, of great monetary value. Something like a finished copy of the study, right? I'll send you, when I was talking to people in Russian TV, it was like, oh, I'll send you a copy of my dissertation when I'm done writing it. And most of them are like, yeah, cool. I'm pretty sure none of them ever read it. I remember, sorry, I was in the email chain because one of them was introducing me to someone else. And I'll always remember his very dismissive comment, but it worked. It's like, yeah, so this kid, he wants to, I was in my 30s, but I still remember, he wants to, interview people who worked in Russian TV. No big deal. I swear, like 6 people are going to read this. So, whatever you say, no one's ever going to find out. But, I still offered them a copy of my dissertation. At the end, they all took it very graciously, or at least some of them didn't answer. So I assume they read it. Maybe, but probably not. So you can offer them something like that, a tour of the facility, a copy of your book or dissertation when it's done. You can put them in your acknowledgements, but again, it can't be like, I'm going to pay you or give you a car. And it's unlikely as a researcher that you're going to have money to do that kind of stuff anyway, because academia is not, at least in the social sciences, maybe the medical sciences are different. We're generally not rolling in cash for the most part. Okay. Coffee done. Okay. So how do you get into a closed setting? Providing a clear explanation of what you're doing, right? And people will want to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, what is it you're looking for. They won't ask you necessarily what your research question is, but they want to know, like, what are you trying to figure out? Like, what do you want to know? What is it you're hoping to learn? All of that stuff, your aims and your methods. What are you going to be doing? You're going to be interviewing, you're going to be making some notes, right? You're going to be doing some observations. Are you going to be talking to people? What is that actually going to look like? Negotiating your terms of access. And this is often a really ongoing process, because they might let you into a site with very specific limitations, right? It might be, that they'll let you in, but they want to make sure that you are not getting in the way. If you're planning on recording stuff, like if you're, using video or voice recording, you have to, negotiate all of that in advance and tell them what you're going to be doing. For the project that Sandra's working on, that I kind of administer, all sorts of stuff had to be negotiated. How were you going to be doing, because we're doing closed interviews, so surveys, but that's administered by a person. And it was like, I swear, this is 100% true. It was down to what kind of device we could bring in. So it's all being done on iPads. We had to specify what kind of iPad, right? So it was, and they're like, oh, is it an iPad Pro? Does it have a modem in it? Does it have just Wi-Fi, or is it the one with cellular service, right? So we were like, it's an iPad 9th generation, Wi-Fi only, all of it, right down to it, because it's corrections, it's prisons, right? So they wanted to know everything about what we were bringing in, what we're going to be. We have voice recorders. They wanted to know the model of it. Everything had to be, negotiated. Where you're going to be in the prison. This has been an ongoing negotiation for us. For a while it was in these certain little meeting rooms that had tables, and then it was like, you can't have tables anymore. It's been an ongoing schmozzle. The night shift doesn't, or the C shift, I think, doesn't like us as much. So they don't want us to have tables. The other people are okay. It's this ongoing kind of process of negotiating, who's allowed and all of these sorts of things. And thankfully, our grad students are amazing, and they've done a great job of schmoozing the correctional officers. But all of this has been this ongoing kind of negotiation down to are you allowed to bring, honestly, can I tell you what kind of pen? It had to be a Bic plastic pen, clear with no spring. Right, and it was because they might take the spring and use it to make a spring-mounted knife in prison. And I was like, I never thought of any of these things, but this is all spelled out in the documents, what we're allowed to bring in. You can bring in a pen, but it has to be a clear Bic with no spring, and you have to take the cap off and leave it in the car. You can't bring the cap in. That's been a wild. I've never seen anything like it. My negotiations were much simpler. It was pretty much you can come, but stay out of the way and don't talk to anyone. I'm like, okay, I can stay out of the way and not talk to anyone. That was our terms. This one has been a formal agreement that lists this kind of iPad, this kind of clothes, no hoodies, because you can grab hoodies, right? All of this is spelled out. So you have to negotiate your access, and depending on how sensitive the site is, it can be a very sensitive negotiation. It can be all sorts of crazy. Trying to get all of these things worked out. There are so many things that go into it, and especially, prison's a unique situation because it's such a controlled space, and the people who work there are used to being in control, so they want to control everything. Other sites might be really chill. I've heard of people doing research, say in Alcoholics Anonymous groups, where they do an overt ethnography, where they're just observing the meetings, and they negotiate, saying, okay, you just have to say who you are. You can't say anybody's real names in your research, and the rest is fine. So it can be easy, hard. The more sensitive it is, the more likely you are to come up with really complex terms of negotiation. So that kind of stuff is definitely there. Yeah, this one. Be open about how much time your research will take. And if anything, there's nothing formally spelled out in, say, the literature, but I would say, if anything, if you're approaching someone to access a closed setting, overestimate the time that your research is going to take by 10 to 15%, right? So if you think it's going to take a month, say that it's going to take 2 months or a month and a half, right? So that if you come in, what's that? Well, okay, like, I don't know. A month is not an easy one to add to. I guess like 33 days, 35 days. But yeah, like just say it's going to take like 5-6 weeks. Why? Because if it ends up that, and you probably will, almost inevitably, you're going to have underestimated how much time things are going to take. And so if you come under, right, if you get your research done super fast, nobody is going to worry that you got out of there faster. They're not going to care. If you end up going over, people will get, as I say, bad word, irritated about it. Because now suddenly you're there and you're asking for more access for longer than you said, and they're going to get annoyed with you, right? So just be really clear about it, and just keep in mind that in a lot of cases, your presence is a little bit disruptive in these spaces. They have to worry about you, what you're doing. Are you following the rules you said? They don't know you, so I would say just be cautious with it and overestimate the amount of time. Like I said, if you come way under, no one cares. If you go way over, you can sever that relationship because people are going to remember how annoyed they were with you that you took, an extra 3 weeks to do your research. Yeah, please.
Is there like a time where institutions would be like required? Because you're saying, I don't know, you're making it sound like people don't like researchers, which is like fair, but it is
kind of true. Yeah.
It's important, right, for like, I don't know, learning things, implementing new policies, things like that.
Right.
So is there ever a time, are people allowed to say no to you in the case where like your research is important for some type of like development of a policy, let's say in corrections, if you're trying to figure out how to reform like jails and things like that?
So yeah, definitely. People can say, the other thing they can do, so like let's talk about the project that we're working on. Alberta Justice agreed to the project, and that kind of mandate went down to the individual correctional institutions. So technically, yes, they are supposed to let us in. However, they do have a lot of discretion over how these sites are run, right? So the wardens of each, so if they want to, I guess they could follow the spirit of, or the letter of the kind of mandate they were given, but throw up so many barriers in your way as to make it basically impossible for you to actually conduct the research, right? So in a lot of cases, there's a lot of places that just aren't going to care, right? Like, you want to reform prisons, how nice for you, right? Like, and I don't mean to sound cynical, but like the warden, the COs at that institution, totally, they couldn't care less, right? For the most part, all they're going to see is the problems that you being there is going to create for them, right? So you might, you have a noble mission to reform, the university or whatever institution you want to research. Most places don't have to let you in, so you have to negotiate that. And even if, say a boss or a minister said, okay, we think this is important research, we want to find out, so please make it happen, they can just stymie. There's so many ways that they can make your life more difficult and make that process really almost impossible, right? Like, they could say you're only allowed on these days, right? So that if you wanted to interview 500 incarcerated people, it's going to take you a year or 2 years, right? And do you have that kind of time? So we are only Thursdays, right? Thursday's the only day that work. And it's going to be really hard. You can then go complain to their boss and but that's going to make things really complicated for you. Then they're going to hate you even more. And then it's going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, we had a little riot here, so unfortunately you can't come in today, right? Or what was it? Like the C shift that didn't like us. Apparently now they love us again. I don't understand. I haven't actually been in the prison. I just hear all the stories from the grad students. It's amazing. It was like they didn't like us. They didn't want us standing around in the hall because it was an OHS OHS is the US. OHS, like an occupational health and safety problem. Like, what happens if there's a fire or someone escapes and there's these random grad students standing around in the hall, right? So they were like, we should kick you guys out. They were like lobbying the prison to be like, yeah, they're a problem, get rid of them. Had to kind of smooth that out, which Sandra's really good at doing. Thankfully, she's, how does Gen Z say it? She slays, right? She's awesome. Um, I will heap praise upon her, not only because she signs my paycheck, but because she's actually really great. But yeah, like even spaces you're supposed to be allowed into, they can make it really difficult. Or non-cooperation, right? Send out or informally tell everyone, don't talk to them, right? It can make your life really difficult. So most people don't care about research, right? Most people are just like, how is this making my life harder? How is this making my life more complicated? I have to take time out of my already busy day to go talk to some researcher. Why? So, not everyone's as excited about research as we are, and not everybody sees the social benefits as much as academics do. So, I don't know if does that answer your question? Like maybe too much, maybe too long. But yeah, more and more, the longer I'm in this, the more and more weird stories I have. I love C Shift. Apparently, they turned them around with Boston cream donuts because the shift leader really likes Boston cream. So a box of Tim Hortons donut heavy on Boston creams really turned the whole situation around, and now they love us again. They even apparently gave them their own parking spot and labeled it with a paper that says U of A. So things apparently really turned around after the Boston cream donut, which is the weirdest thing I have said today, possibly. Okay, covert research. Again, the odds that you're going to do covert research, that you're going to be hanging out with white nationalists or neo-Nazis or someone where you have to misrepresent who you are, not super high. If you were, so we were talking about January 6th last class. So if you were going to be doing something like that, you have to adopt a suitable social role so as not to disrupt things and not put yourself at risk, right? So if you're doing covert research, in an open setting, it's less of a big deal, obviously, because anyone could be there. You could adopt a pretty normal role. Depending on the closed environment, you'd have to A, pretend that you belong there, and B, either, let's go back to our furries example, because we know we all love it. With regards to the, furries, you'd want to don a furry suit and as they call it, a fursona, to fit in and adopt a suitable social role in that environment so as not to disrupt it and to seem like you belong there, right? You go there dressed as a Star Trek character, you're gonna make things worse. Okay. What's that? Sure. You know more about this than I do, proving definitively that you're a furry and I'm not.
How would you know it was wrong? How would you know it was right?
I don't know. I have to trust you because I have no idea about fursonas. Okay. Oh, I made this slide too colorful. Okay. Open settings, right? Genuinely a lot easier. Similar process, right, to closed settings, but you probably don't need a sponsor or a gatekeeper because they're generally public settings where anybody can be, right? So you don't have to, negotiate with people, Sometimes you have to kind of make yourself seem like you belong there, hang around. I think I was talking last time about Randall Contreras, who was hanging out with the kind of LA street gangs, and spent, 6 months kind of just before even doing any of the research, just hanging out with LA street gangs, the Latino Maravillas, or Maravillas, I can't remember how it's pronounced. Just kind of hanging out to make his presence more normal, right? So, you might just being there and being in the space can make you seem more normal. But, genuinely, it can be difficult to achieve acceptance of strangers. And especially if you want to go beyond just kind of, a strict participant observation where you're just observing and not talking to anybody, a complete observer kind of scenario. Open settings are really difficult. A, you don't control who's in there. B, it's probably a shifting cast of people, and it can be really difficult to get people to talk to you because you haven't negotiated with anyone that you're going to be talking to people. Okay. Well, here I had on this other slide ongoing access. Ongoing access can be a problem, and it's something that you kind of have to constantly negotiate And you asked a great question, so I burnt a lot of what I was going to say here. But yeah, people can get suspicious about researchers' motives. They might think you're actually looking for something different or looking to make them look foolish. I know definitely, with the COs in correctional institutions, they have a certain suspicion of academics, right? They've heard a lot of things that academics are super liberal, they're woke, they hate the justice system and corrections officers and police officers. And so maybe they're just trying to make, the prison system and correctional officers look bad. So they can be really suspicious of people's motives, which again, they can start throwing barriers up for you and making things difficult if they don't like you. Group members, people who are, there might fear that what they will say or do gets back to bosses or colleagues, right? So they might be worried about what happens or other, I know not in this project, but in other prison research that's been done by the people at the CCR. One of the things that, a lot of the inmates are concerned is that you're going to kind of, in an interview, let slip something that they said to another person who's incarcerated, and that might ultimately, cause trouble for them, right? So they're worried they might not, just what I was kind of talking about. Okay, so yeah, maintaining access, there's a bunch of different strategies, and it's not like you have to do all of these things necessarily, but definitely some of them you need to do. Playing up credentials can work in some cases, right? Especially if you have a PhD already, it can be useful, or you're working on your PhD, it can be a useful tool, right? Anything, if you have a personal connection too, like you worked in this particular industry. I know he used to be a grad student here. He's now at McEwen as a professor. His name is Will Schultz. He used to be a corrections officer, right? He worked for years as a CO, and he's been able to use that really well to do kind of prison research, because the COs kind of inherently trust him, because it's like, hey, you get it, right? You've been here, you get it. So that's really useful. Dan Jones, former Edmonton police officer, now he teaches at Norquest, but he's affiliated with us as well. He was on the force for decades, right? And so again, he's able to play up those credentials in doing police research. Not just the PhD, but other credentials that you have to get people to trust you. Make them think you're on their side. All of that stuff. Don't give people a reason to actively dislike you. This is more of an interview thing, but I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who basically he supervises students at UCLA, right? So he's a professor at UCLA, and they have a big media program there, obviously, because they're in LA. Hollywood's right next door, and so he had one grad student, and he was doing an interview with a famous director who is now the head of a production company. Happened to be the person who had directed a series called Roots way back in the day. It's about kind of African American experiences. And from what Mark told me, is this person, he had negotiated access for this person to talk to this very famous person. It was very difficult to get in, but the person finally was like, okay, for you, Mark, I'll do it. All of this stuff. And the person went in and immediately asked the most off-putting question of this particular director. And then immediately the person was like, they shut down, they answered 5 more questions. They're like, oh, look at the time, I have to go. And then not only didn't finish the interview, but basically told everybody else in that production company, like, we're done, we're not talking to this person anymore. So don't give people a reason to actively dislike you. If you rub someone the wrong way, if they're worried that you're in the hallway and this is an OHS challenge, you have to bend or negotiate or smooth out those differences, because if they dislike you, if they see you as a problem, they will shut you down, right? So very, very important that not only don't give them a reason to dislike you, if something you're doing is annoying them, fix it, right? Fix it, bend, you obviously within reason, right? Don't sleep with anyone to make things better, or do something stupid. Don't buy drugs, don't, bribe them or anything. But if there's something that you're doing that's annoying them, stop doing it, fix it, tell them you're sorry, all this kind of stuff, because they can completely stymie you. Okay. Sometimes it works to play a role or construct a front, so that people are more, oh, can I tell you a fun story? This is actually a fun one. I have a friend. I have lots of friends. As you can tell, I have lots of friends who do lots of interesting things. This one is, she's one of my favorite people. We did our master's degrees together, and her research is fascinating. She was doing her research on a game called World of Warcraft, right? And she specifically was really interested in kind of gendered performances in World of Warcraft. She wrote the paper that is still has my favorite title, which I can't remember where it was published. I want to say it was in a graduate journal. It was called Big-Breasted Night Elves and the Men Who Love to Play as Them. And for whatever reason, this title, I'm just like, I could never write a title that good. My titles always suck. But what she did is she went into the game, right? And she created an actual character. The character's name was Survey Lady. And she would be in the game and voice chat with people to do surveys about their experience in World of Warcraft. And she would tag along on raids to kind of, she was doing an ethnography, but it was a digital ethnography, so it's the weirdest thing ever. So she did an ethnography inside of the game World of Warcraft, which apparently is a thing. She's now a big video game scholar. She's at University of Hawaii, which is less good, apparently. She tells me it's very expensive, and people show up to class in bikinis, especially in the first semester of their first year, because they think it's just a party school and the beach is just over there. So they're going to come to class and then go swimming. Apparently, those people don't make it to the second semester. They end up going broke and going home. And then by the second semester, nobody shows up in their swimsuits anymore. But the first semester, there's a lot of, as she said it, you stare at a lot of boobs. Because a lot of people are in very low-cut bikinis and coming to class. Also, all the promotional material for University of Hawaii has people in swimsuits, which is weird. It's like, hey, yeah, what's that? Propaganda, yeah. But yeah, she did this research online, and she created a persona, which was Survey Lady, right? And then people in this certain area of World of Warcraft got to know Survey Lady, and they would invite Survey Lady along for raids, and she would participate. I think she was a healer, so she could heal people, as part of raids. But she's like, I really don't want to fight anything, so I'll just heal people. That'll be my kind of thing when people are doing raids. And that was, she created a kind of persona in a role. Now, it's obviously a really extreme kind of way of doing it, but often people will have a sort of, a character they play when they're doing research. I don't know how else to put it. You're not really yourself, but you have a kind of a front, right? Sometimes it can be a really cold affect, right, where you don't give people a lot, or you're really fun and gregarious, and you're really, connect with people, and you're kind of, playing up your more friendly aspects to get access. Whatever you have to do, in a sense, again, don't sleep with anyone, unless you want to. I guess it's okay if you want to, but not so you can have access. But, don't do anything that you don't want to do just to keep your research access. But, you can adopt a kind of persona that helps you get in or helps keep people on your side, right? Whatever it happens to be. Okay, having a plan for allaying people's suspicions, it can be difficult because you might not know what those suspicions are. But if you reassure people, you can reassure people. You can bring, is your phone okay? All right. Tragedy of the broken screen has been avoided. If it is bringing donuts, right? If it is kind of connecting, spending the first 10 minutes connecting with people, whatever it happens to be, right? Allaying their suspicions, making them at ease with you is important. Oh yeah, this one's always fun. Be prepared for tests of competence and credibility. So, I had this. And again, this was in an interview. It wasn't in an ethnography, but the same principle kind of applies. So I was interviewing a vice president at Sony Pictures, right? And she had done, because I was doing my project on Russian TV, she was basically like she's the assistant to the president that was in charge of Sony Pictures Russia. And so I Skyped in, because we were using Skype at the time, connected with her on Skype, and I swear the first 10 minutes of our conversation was a test, right? And her test was, do you know what you're talking about, or am I just wasting my time? So she started throwing at me the titles of a bunch of Russian TV shows, all of which I knew because I'd been like immersed in it for 6 years or 5 years by that point. So I knew all of these shows. I knew all the stuff Sony had done in Russia, but it was a test of my competence, right? Did I know what I was talking about, or was I some dumb academic, who was just intellectually interested in this particular research topic but didn't really know anything about it, so she was just going to be wasting her time. Now, once I got through that 15-minute period, we had an hour scheduled for this interview, and this took about 15 minutes. The interview ended up going 2.5 hours. We had a great conversation. But I remember at the end of this, I was like, I started asking her questions. I'm like, well, have you seen this show? Have you seen this show? And she had, because obviously that was her job. But she was like, man, you really know this stuff backwards and forwards. And I'm like, yeah, I should. I'm researching and I've been working on it for like 6 years. And after we got past that, after that test of my credibility that she was putting me through to like, I don't even know if she was doing it consciously. She was just testing whether I knew what I was talking about, right? Once we were past that, smooth sailing, like I said, the conversation went way over. At an hour, I was like, hey, I still have a few questions. Do you have more time? She's like, oh, yeah, we can keep going as long as you want, right? But that's going to happen, right, in any kind of setting. And it might not be knowledge, right, your competence, your credibility. Do you know anything about this, right? Which is why like Will and Dan are really in a good position being former COs and cops, because they have that credibility, but people will still test them, right? Oh, did you ever do this? Did you ever have this happen when you were on the unit, right? It's something that Will gets asked all the time. And of course the answer is yes, right? Did you ever work here, right? Because like in Edmonton, ERC, Edmonton Remand Center, is the big bad, right? Because I think it's the biggest prison in Canada, or one of the biggest prisons in Canada. Certainly the biggest in Western Canada. So anyway, there's all these sorts of tests that they have to ask people. You're going to get challenged. People want to know that you as an academic, they want to know you're not just an egghead. So they're going to challenge you and see whether you actually know or care about this, and to what extent. So just be prepared for that. And yeah, this is probably the biggest thing I've seen with Sandra's project. Oh, sorry, was that Haley? That wasn't a question. I saw movement, so I wasn't sure. I was looking down at the time. Yeah, be adaptable, right? Things are going to change. People are going to get mad at you. They're going to get upset that you're taking up some table or some booth that they think they need, or you're standing in the hallway and they think it's a health and safety problem. Rolling with the punches is super important. Kind of not letting stuff fluster you or get you off balance, and just kind of dealing with it in a mature, sensible way. Like, you can go drinking with your colleagues and rant and rave about how stupid it is, but in the moment, you have to just put people at ease, meet their demands, fix problems, because all those things are going to come up in an ethnography, or a setting where you're, in a closed setting that's controlled. All that stuff is going to happen if you're there, and you just kind of have to roll with it. Okay. Another way you can go is what's called key informants. So key informants are basically, typically you would find key informants in big organizations that are fairly complex. And probably, key informants are going to be people who are particularly knowledgeable or cooperative. So you would use them, A, because they want to talk to you, or B, because you think they're in a particularly special position where they might have more knowledge than other people. I don't know, like I'm thinking, I can't think of a straight up example of this. I don't have a story for key informants. I really should. I should think of it. I've never actually used a key informant in some senses in an ethnography, so I don't necessarily know. But you might focus on one person, right? The CEO of a company, because they're particularly knowledgeable about what goes on, or the head of a division, right? The warden of a prison, whatever it happens to be, because they're in a particular position where they would have more knowledge than other people, and maybe they want to help you too. I know people have done research with in gangs with particular gang members that were particularly, friendly to them, right? They use them as key informants and keep going back to that same person because that person will talk to them and they have a relationship with them, right? So this is what it looks like. Now the drawback to key informants is obviously you cut down your sample, right? If you rely too much on key informants, you might be leaving other people out of the mix that also have interesting things to say, but you're not approaching them because you've kind of keyed in on key informants. You might get locked into a sort of perspective, right? You might, the key informant might introduce you to other people who become other key informants, but you get locked into maybe a niche within an organization or an institution. So, they're useful, and inevitably, you end up using key informants a bit, but you want to make sure that you're also, not limiting yourself just to their point of view. Okay. 24 minutes. That's tea. Have you ever done that thing where in your brain, the thing you have in your hand is I thought it was coffee. I was convinced that this was coffee, and I took a sip of it and it's tea, and it tasted the most disgusting I've ever, and I actually really like this tea. I did that one time at Costco, I think I put iced tea in my cup and I was expecting root beer, and I drank the iced tea and I was like, oh, what's wrong with this root beer? What's wrong with it was it's iced tea. I just did that too. So I'm like, well, what's wrong with this coffee? Oh wait, it's tea. And it's just that moment where your brain has to catch up with reality. Okay, so this is a couple basic roles for ethnographers. Basically from, here, complete participant to not a participant at all, or what we call a complete observer. Okay, so a complete participant. Basically, typically covert, right? You're in a kind of covert role. You would be posing as a member of the group that you're studying. You have a secret role in the group, and you take part in everything, right? So if you're a group of, I don't want to beat on MAGA Republicans. Let's just say MAGA Republicans goes down for the January 6th protest at the Capitol. You slap on your bullhorns and Viking paint and you steal the Speaker of the House's podium because you're doing everything they're doing, right? Again, don't do anything illegal. Or, you are a furry and you have the full furry outfit on and you basically adopt the role of a furry to do the research, and no one knows that you're a researcher. You do everything that happens at whatever places furries hang out. Whatever it happens to be, right? You do that, you pretend to be a gang member, you pretend to join the Hells Angels. That would be a complete participant, right? And you do everything that's kind of required. Or, again, the ethics of this would be super questionable, but you're studying people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and you stand up and you're like, hi, my name's Jeff and I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober for 4 days. And you take on, like, it would be super unethical. I wouldn't, right? I'm using it as an example, but don't do that. It would be super bad. But yeah, that would be what a complete participant looks like, right? You're actually actively in there. Yeah, you get closest to the participants and their activities. There's risk of over-identification. Obviously, you get to like the people within the group or feel like you're actually part of it, right? Just because you're a researcher, keep that in mind, right? It doesn't mean you're immune to normal human and sociological processes. This is why things like research on cults is super tricky, because in a few cases, researchers will join cults, right? There's lots of, say, people who've done research on like Islam that started out as like secular humanists and ended up joining Islam, right? Because you start to identify with the people you're studying. Nothing wrong with joining Islam, but you start to identify with the people that you're studying, and you build bonds with them, and you build social bonds with people. You're more likely to identify with them, and that can lead to you over-identifying or actually joining the group. The opposite is also true, right? You can develop a really strong dislike for the people you're studying, right? Maybe you learn that you just really hate furries, right? You're much more of a brony at heart and you really hate furries. And so you start writing like the most scathing account of furries humanly possible, right? What's that?
Yeah, a lot of bronies.
They're not I think the brony is more of a subculture related to that specific piece of media, where furry is a little bit broader. But yeah, you definitely have furries or bronies that are also like full-on animal suit kind of folks. But I know. I know. Let's not get too deep into my. Again, we've now firmly established that both of you are furries, and I'm kidding. Yeah, I know not every furry wears an animal suit. Some of it is like online only, but anyway, let's pretend they all wear animal suits because that makes my example a lot easier. Well, let's go with that, okay? Stop fighting me, Joan. Stop fighting me on everything. What was I saying?
We have 10 minutes left.
Thank you. Are you saying we should be done now? Is that what you're actually? Is that your? Apparently, people.
I was going to give you 10 extra minutes.
Oh, we actually have 19 minutes left. You're lying to me. Okay. Anyway, you might, if you discover you loathe that group, you really hate them, that could skew the data, right? You might write a really negative account of them at the end of the day, and that's not fair either, right? So both things are a possibility: over-identification or hatred of them, and both of them are a potential problem. Okay, the participant as observer. So the researcher adopts a role in the group. So you would, say participate in the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but they know you're there, right? And they know who you are. So you would be at the meetings, right? You're sitting there, you're listening, you're actively taking notes. You're at the furry convention and you're circulating through. You're not in a fursuit or anything, and people know who you are. And in a sense, right, like my friend Kelly and her World of Warcraft stuff was kind of this, right? Participant as observer. Everybody knew who she was. Her name in the thing was Survey Lady, and she would introduce herself with a script that's like, "Hi, I'm the Survey Lady. I'm da 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 da. Can you follow this link and fill out this consent form so we can do an interview?" Right? All of those things in World of Warcraft, right? And then go along on raids and all of that stuff. So, had a role in the group or in that particular environment. People knew who they were. Now, obviously, once people know who you are, and this is going to be true of essentially, any setting where you are a researcher and people know what you're doing, there can be reactivity, right? People may change their behavior based on that, right? Based on just you being there and them knowing that you are there. They might not be as honest, and I remember Kelly saying that people would turn off their microphones and do only text when she was there, especially men who were playing as female characters, because they were worried about how that would be perceived socially, right? So that they were comfortable with their particular group of friends and playing as a big-breasted night elf with that group, but didn't want that known necessarily. So there can be reactivity, right, where people react to the role of the researcher. It's unavoidable, right? The second people know you're a researcher, you can't control what people are going to do. Okay, so that's participant as observer. Observer as participant, right? So this is very similar. So basically, you would sort of be at the edge, right? The researcher observes and interviews from the edge of a group, right? So you wouldn't participate in the meeting. You might be there. You might ask people for interviews, but you wouldn't interact, outside of an interview setting. You wouldn't be an active participant in much of anything. You're there. People know who you are. They're aware that they're being observed, but you're not. You're trying to be as unobtrusive as possible and interact as little as possible within the observer as participant role. So reactivity is still there. And incorrect interpretation of activity is there as well, because you're not as involved and you're not partaking as much. You're more kind of on the edge, just listening, observing, not participating, and just doing interviews kind of on the edge of a group, right? Maybe you're not even in the AA meeting, you're just talking to people afterwards, right? So that is a less involved, still there, and still people know that you're there. All right, and the last one, this is probably the most naturalist position that you can take as an ethnographer, is the complete observer, where people don't know that you're there, right? You don't wear a giant sandwich board saying, I am a researcher and I am watching you, right? You just like are dressed normally. You don't engage with any of the participants at all, right? You're just moving through a space or observing a space. Maybe you're doing it through video, CCTV cameras, but in a way that people will not know they're being observed by you. So obviously that means you don't do interviews, right? So this is an ethnography that's straight participant observation, right? With no interviews and none of the other aspects that you can mix in to make an ethnography a little bit richer. So yeah, there's no risk of reactivity because people don't know that you're there, so you can be fairly confident that they're acting in kind of a normal way, but you're also not going to get a lot of context, right? Any behavior that you observe, you're sort of relying on only your interpretation of what's happening, rather than participant accounts or asking them, hey, why did you do this? Oh, why does this happen at, FurryCon 2008 or, MegaCon, or if there's such a thing, a Trump rally or some such thing, right? You're not getting any of that information from participants, so you don't kind of know what their reasons for doing things are. So each of them has kind of benefits. Oh, Haley, yes, please.
Sorry, could you go over the reactivity and the versus between the two?
Like these two?
Yeah.
What could you just
like explain a bit.
what is risk of reactivity?
Yeah.
Okay, sure, of course, no problem. So you know what reactivity is or no?
Just in general, in relation to like when people react because they
Yes, that's what. Reactivity is basically anytime people know they're being observed, there's a chance that they're going to modify their behavior, either usually to appear better in the eyes of the person that's observing them, or not be completely honest because they're worried about. It can be anything like judgment. They can be worried about secrets being let out, right? They can all sorts of things, right? I mean, this goes from like very basic observational practices, like if you have a friend. You probably have a friend that anytime you pull out the camera to take a picture, they start goofing off in front of the camera, right? Because they know suddenly they're being observed. That's a form of reactivity. In kind of social research, you're worried that people aren't going to be themselves, right? Or aren't going to act like they normally would. And it can go to like shutdown. People don't do anything. All the way to people try to give you what you want. And sometimes it's like, it can be their perception of what they think you want. Like you've now said, hey, I'm a researcher. I'm researching, I don't know, the way COs treat, other COs, are there ever conflicts or whatever. And then they might be like, oh, I'm going to be really helpful, right? That's well-intentioned. And they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to show that while this person is here, we're going to have a fight between two of the COs and I'm going to punch some guy in the face, right? Because they're like, we're going to show you a conflict. And you can have all sorts of things like that where people try to give you what you want. And so it can be like from complete shutdown to like almost hammy acting to try and like help the researcher get what they want. And in that case, like people think they're really helping you. They're not, because you were hoping to see what people are actually like. They might play up things, that are happening, their perspective. They might talk more than they usually would because they just really want to give you what you want. So that's kind of reactivity in general. If you're in the kind of participant as a observer role, so you're playing a role in the group, right? They might choose not to interact with you at all and not to interact with anyone, but even though that's their normal pattern because they know you're there. Or it might be that person that's like constantly in your face, right? Like, because they know you're participating. It's like, I really agree with what that guy said, do you know what I mean? Right? They might interact with you on an abnormal level even. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reactivity makes sense because they know that the research is there.
Yeah, and so.
That's why there's no reactivity in the last one.
Yeah, that's right, because you're hiding in the grass like this person. Not necessarily. You don't have to hide in the grass, but you could be hiding in plain sight or using CCTV cameras. They don't know that you're there, so they can't react to your presence, but you can't get the same depth of knowledge. Right, so you're the spectrum, right? Everything's on a spectrum. yeah, so basically it's between like involvement to detachment, right? So complete involvement here, and then less and less involvement as you move towards the complete observer. And again, none of these are wrong. None of these are incorrect approaches. There's not one that I would say is necessarily better than another. It really comes, I mean, this one is all, it is dicey, and I think, you know, covert research makes me really uncomfortable. But I can see purposes for it as well. But not one of them is right or wrong. There's not like, it's not a value chain where it's like, you know, the observer as participant is the you know, the one that gets the gold star. You should absolutely do that one as opposed to the other ones. It really is up to the researcher situationally to decide what is the best approach to use for the research that I'm doing. What's going to get me the most naturalistic results with the least reactivity, and where am I going to get the most information, right? Because, you know, least reactivity is always going to be this one, but you might not get the depth of knowledge that you're looking for. So you might move into one of these positions, or even over to here, you know, to the complete participant, so that you get that depth of knowledge. And it's really going to depend on, you know, and it's something you have to work out as the researcher, hopefully as master's and PhD students with your supervisors. I say too much, but it really is dependent on the research project you're doing. All right. So how are we doing here? Yeah. All right. We'll do this last slide, and then we'll call it, because field notes is a whole topic in and of itself. You know, active or passive participation, right? Sometimes you need an active role in order to maintain credibility in the minds of the people you're studying, right? So you might have to move more towards here to maintain credibility. You know, it depends on the group, right? To show your bona fides, you might have to move more, you know, in the maybe participant as observer or complete participant to get the information you want. But it can be physically dangerous and have ethical implications, right? Gangs research, you know, can be dangerous. Studying gangs, the Hells Angels, whatever. All of this stuff can be potentially problematic. So again, something to be judged, something you have to work out. What risk is worth it in terms of getting the information versus safety, ethics, you know, protecting your participants, and all of that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, we're long with it.
What's that?
We're long with it.
I thought I'd give you a look just to play up the joke. All right, let's leave it there, because yeah, field notes are their own topic. I'd like to keep it all together, so we'll cut out, as we often do, a little bit early. We'll pick it up from field notes on Monday. So we will see you on Monday. I will keep my beautiful scribbles because I love them. And turn off the recording. Ooh. Don't do that.